Matthew 13, 44 through 46. Those are the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. And it says there, again, the kingdom of heaven is a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Now, if we look at those, and they follow right one after the other, they bring uniqueness. We've got what? We've got something that's been identified as very valuable. In one case, it's a treasure that's hidden in a field. In the other case, it's a pearl of great price. And what happens? Same thing in both cases. The person who identified these things, found these things, goes and sells all that he has in order to obtain that particular object. Why is it twice in there? Wasn't it good enough to say it was a treasure? Or maybe you liked the pearl better. Let's put one of those in there. Why did God choose to put it in there twice? Two stories, completely back to back. The second, not adding any particularly more value to the message being shared other than the mere fact that it's a repetition of that. An emphasis, if you will, of what God wanted, or in that case, Jesus particularly wanted to share with his followers. So we see it in stories like that. In this case, blatantly right side by side. In the case of 4,000 fed and 5,000, not so close. We see God using the idea of repetition to send a point, even when he was dealing with mankind. So if we look at the situation that we have with the Old Testament and Pharaoh, Joseph, had his fun times with his brothers. God blessed him. In some ways, he may have felt he cursed him with the ability to become whom he was and to have the visions of what was going to be his role with his brothers later on, which did not make his brothers happy. So we know he got sold into slavery. We know he had the difficulty with Potiphar's wife. We know he got put into prison. He helped out the butler and the wine taster, and they didn't do anything for him until Pharaoh had a dream. In fact, Pharaoh had two dreams, not just one. And suddenly the one of those two Pharaoh's servants that he had interpreted their dreams for remembered him, remembered what Joseph had been able to do for their dreams. And they told Pharaoh about it, and they called Joseph to interpret the dreams because nobody else could do it. And so Genesis 41, verses 25 through 32 tells us about that. It says, "Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, 'The dreams of Pharaoh are one.'" God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. And the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and a famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And he sums it up by saying, "And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice." Why was it repeated twice, Joseph? Because the thing is established by God and God will shortly bring it to pass. God wanted to emphasize to Pharaoh what was about to happen so that something could be done about it. Just one dream, Pharaoh says, 7 years, I got some time to go. It was important. It was important enough to give 2 dreams for it. It's something that's going to be his message to him. So we saw it in stories, we see it in themes, we see it in God even using it from that perspective as well as we look at that. We also see it in what God expects from people. When he talked to people about his people, when he put out the law about knowing that law, learning that law, sharing that law. It wasn't, get it once and then go off and take care of it. It was repetition, so that it was always on their hearts and always on their minds. Deuteronomy 6:6-9. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. That's pretty much all you do, if you think about it. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Repetition of all those things. Why was it? Shouldn't it be enough for me, as we do it probably, and we study once a day? Right? We do it at night. There, we got it handled. Really? It says, when you're sitting around, when you're walking, when you're lying down, you're going to post them in places to remind you about them. You're going to have that Bible ready at all positions. This is what you get to really understand and be able to follow my law. Repetition, availability of it from that. So we see repetition in what God expected about how people were supposed to deal with his law. Do you think that God expects less of us as Christians today because we don't have such a command that says we're supposed to look at scriptures all the time like this? Was that something he peculiarly only asked of the Jews? Okay, that's an easy question, right? That's one of those rhetorical almost. Yeah, no. No, God doesn't expect anything less of us. The fact that he didn't take to do that is partly because he wants us to be self-motivated more as Christians, because we know what he's done for us. That calls for us to take action. It shouldn't be forced all the time to lay it out and say you've got to do it all these different times. Now, I'm not going to ask for hands for people who think they live up to doing anything close to what the Jews were called to do. Because I don't want you and me to both see there's no hands that are being raised, or at least very few. Because we don't do a good job of following that. Repetition is important to how we learn from that. Phrase repetition is also something we see a lot in the Bible. We see it, for instance, in Joshua. In Joshua, there is a phrase that starts at the very beginning that God tells to Joshua. He says, "Be strong and of good courage." Why? Because Joshua is taking on an immense challenge, right? He's going to lead the people of Israel. Have they been obedient all along the way? No. They've had a great leader in Moses. Moses has been able to do all these miracles. God spoke to him from the mountain, and so on we can go about why they should have just followed Moses. But in fact, they didn't do a very good job of that. Not only has he got to worry about the people from that, but he's going to face people that at one time were said by the spies to be what? What were the people of the land of Canaan? Or what were the people of Israel according to those spies? We are as what to them? We're as grasshoppers to them, right? They're giants. Now, it was an exaggeration. It's because they had some of the giants living there, but they kind of transposed that to everybody was a giant. But you're going to challenge some people. They had fortified cities. They had armies. All these things that were going to face them from that. God said to him, "Be strong and of good courage." Was it good enough for God to say that once? Was it good enough to limit that saying to just Joshua? No. He said it to him 4 times in the first chapter alone. Him or the people repeated that to Joshua. And then later in chapter 10, it shared it with the people. Is there value in saying that over and over again? We know there is. It's much like we try to deal with our kids, and you tell them that they're of value, that you love them. Do you tell them that you love them only once? Do you tell your spouse that you only loved them once? I told you that once. You'd be like the story goes, "You never tell me I love you. If I change my mind, I'll let you know. You know I love you because I said it once." Not good enough. Not the way that it needs to be. So repetition serves a purpose from that. We have repetition in acts that we take as Christians. God said it's important enough for us to take the idea of our communion, our Lord's Supper, and saying, okay, we take that once in our lives? No. We take that once a year? No. We take that quarterly? No. We do that on a weekly basis to keep that at our forefront, to keep that as our focus, to repeat that, not so that it becomes rote and becomes unimportant to us from that, but so that we do have more focus on it, that we do see the value in it. Repetition. And we see repetition of phrases and words from that being in there. Sometimes we find those words to be in there, to be the result of quoting other scriptures, right? We'll see it where sometimes we've got a scripture that comes from the Old Testament that someone in the New Testament or the writer of a book will quote to us from that regard, and we'll see that kind of repetition. Sometimes we're not overly aware with it until it comes up. I mean, I don't look at every one of the little footnotes to see, oh, that's a quote, unless it's kind of called out. You see those ones and says, and Joshua said, well, okay, well then, that's a quote. Some others, they're not so clear for that, right? We have the situation of Jesus on the cross, giving a quote, and he didn't say, hey, David said, because of course David was inspired for one thing, and he knows how that works, Jesus does. But he said in Matthew 27, verse 46, and about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, I read that a lot, never really looked for it because I didn't see it, David said. So I didn't realize that was a quote. That's because I'm not that bright. I don't know how you let me be a teacher, but there you go. And I'll teach you all about that. And then someday I have to be reading a psalm and go, wait a minute. Psalms 22:1 starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? It's not coincidental at all, I don't believe, that Jesus went back to quote from the Old Testament. He didn't have to have original words. They were God's original words shared through David from that. So we find those types of situations out there where, we have words that are repeated from other places because they're quotes, those types of things. And I find myself as I've gotten older and as I do my daily Bible reading, running into more of those kind of things that I go, I didn't notice that before. And I do that with words that get repeated in multiple places or phrases that get repeated in various places. And considering those things, I think about, why is it like that? Why do I see this in there? Why did they choose to have the same words utilized in different places? And when I do that, I see the value along that point. And I see that, in the secular world, right? If we look at literature, you find repetition of things. Lines that are repeated that glue into your mind. You know some of those from classics that you've read probably, or other books that you really like from an author that comes back to saying the same kinds of things. There's repetition that brings out some stuff from that. What do you think the purpose is in general literature to repeat things, to repeat phrases? Why does a writer in general, not looking at the Bible particularly, but a writer in general, why would they want to repeat a phrase? What's the value of doing that? To make a point, right? If we see something repeated, does it make an impression upon us? Sure, we might have whipped on it the first time and kind of got it. We go to the second time and go, this, I think I've seen this before. I think I read that before. And if they're doing that, there's normally some kind of message they want us to get from that. Some meaning to glean from that. That's not accidental. It's purposely put there for us to gain something out of it from that. So, repetition in literature, I took this from I forget where, but out of some scholarly thing. It said a definition of repetition. It's an instance where a word or phrase is repeated to do what? To provide clarity, to make clear what's going on, to make an emphasis of that. It highlights to highlighting deeper meanings in the text. Now, repetition, as it says in literature, can be both subtle and obvious, and writers can get very creative about what those repeating words signify. So again, what's it there for? Well, it's there for clarity. Make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Let's use those words again so we don't think it's something else I'm talking about. To emphasize it. Draw it out. We see it twice. We see it 3 times, we see it 4 times, it starts to really come out to us from that. And it can bring out some deeper meanings from that. We can also think about it in education. I've never ran into a teacher who wouldn't say that one of their biggest strategies in teaching whatever age group they teach is repetition. That's how we learn. Again, in an educational standpoint, when stimuli are learned by repetition, they are remembered better and retained for a longer time. Why did God want the people to go over his laws all the time? So they'd remember them, so they'd retain them. What do we know they didn't do? They didn't go over them all the time like they were supposed to because they forgot them all the time. They failed in that commandment from that. But that's what teachers do. They constantly go over the same thing so that it gets drilled in the mind. It becomes natural. You remember it. It's there for you. You can retain it over time. How come you can still add if you're one amongst us as senior citizens that, aren't in school doing it in a book anymore? Well, guess what? It got drilled into you. Repetition. You've learned it. It got in there for an emphasis from that. You knew it was important. It was something you're going to use. And so it's all there and available to you from that. So what were the words that caught my attention that we're going to look at in this particular quarter as we go a long ways? Well, I don't know what actually triggered. You never know. You kind of see words and then you see them again and then you go, and then you see them again and you go, from that. And I'm not really sure when it was that these words hit me, but they came to me from that regard from that. And the words that we're going to be looking at in this class is here I am. Here I am. It appears in the Bible some in the neighborhood of 25 or more times. That phrase or something very, very close to it from that. Pretty much that phrase. It's spoken by 17 different men in the Bible. Most of it is obviously in the Old Testament, but I think is meaningful there from us to learn lessons from that. So here I am is going to be our focus for this particular chapter. And I don't think, first of all, we don't want to confuse that I am portion of it with God's answer to Moses from the burning bush. When God said, then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name, and what shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So when we read it, it's not here I am, it's not here is God. So I don't want that confusion. I'm sure there wasn't any, but I had to bring it up just to be a smart aleck, I guess, nothing else from that. But we see it in these different instances. I'm sure that some of you, as I put those words up, recollections came up of places and people that you remember saying those words in the Old Testament and in the Bible. Some of them are very distinct, very easy to remember from that. The stories that comes up and the reasons for them saying the question that they may be asking. I doubt that any of you could come up with all of those. And some places you might think it would be, if I just tried to give you a test, that you would think it would be there, and it's not. It's not the answer. The best example of that comes in Genesis 3, 9, and 10. In Genesis 3, verse 9, we have God speaking in the garden, and he says, Then the Lord God called Adam and said to him, where are you? What would be the natural response? Here I am. Here I am. Is that what Adam said? Clue, I told you it wasn't going to be. No. Adam answers, so he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. Now, let's look at that whole situation. Did God really not know where Adam was? No, he did not know where he knew where he was. Did Adam believe that God didn't know where he was? No. What was the real question? Well, it's the one that Adam, does a poor job of trying to answer, which is, why are you hiding? Not where are you, but why are you hiding from me? And that's the question then that Adam turns around to answer. So it's no wonder that we don't get by, repeated phrase here from Adam, because it wasn't the intended question, and both sides knew that. So ask one question, get a different answer. And we'll see that when we think that that would be, the question every time we find those instances where we will find the words, here I am, that it's going to be that kind of deal, where are you? That's not the situation that we're going to find. Something equivalent in many cases, maybe, but we're not going to find that in all those cases of when it comes out from that. So the words here and I indicate some kind of response to some kind of inquiry, right? Somebody's asked something, or you wouldn't say that. You don't just go into wrong. Well, some of you do, and go, here I am. If you're really proud of yourself, everybody wants to know that. Here I am, that's it. But most of the time, it's going to be in response to somebody making some inquiry from you. And so, when we look at it, we'll find those three words, but we'll find 17 men answering somewhat different questions from that, different reasons from that, different situations that they answer that question, and different lessons that we can learn from those different instances. What I can say about this class is whether you gain anything from it or not, it is not a class you've studied before. I'm pretty sure I can find nobody who has studied Here I Am before in a classroom setting anyway. Maybe you're into repetition like Lincoln is and you've done it on your own, but nobody in a class from that. So it will be new to you even if I, as a teacher, am not new to you from that. That's what we're going to look at from that. So I'm going to try different than I did last time around to, get through it, as best I can as we go along quickly and try to do it within a quarter. We'll see how that works. So when we look at that phrase, it starts out with the word here. What does the word here mean? Well, here means I'm in, I'm at, I'm to this place or position. It is a location, basically, right? I'm not over there. I'm not somewhere. I'm here, right? So it says right away a location that's involved in it when I answer with that phrase. The second word is I. I is myself, my person, my being. I physically am something, right? Not somebody else, not something else. It's me. And then we get am. That's an expression of existence or being. So here is a place, this is me, and the condition is I'm there. My being is there. I exist here. Right? So that's the answer that we're giving out of that. As any one of those people talks about it, they're there. It may be that I'm volunteering to take on a task. Who can do this? Here I am, I'll do it. Again, maybe where are you? Here I am, I'm over here. Big classroom, call the roll, you got to come up with where everybody's at, then you'll see that coming into play where you want somebody to tell you where they're at from that. All right? So why do you think we would have such a response? Why would we respond to someone by saying, here I am? I've given you some ideas. You got any other ideas why that would come up? Your mom called you. Yeah, because if you don't answer the first time, then you get all three of your names at some point. First, middle, and some of you in the South have more than three, so I don't mean to belittle you with 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever it will be. Absolutely. That was a big one from that. Other times, why would we respond to someone by saying, here I am? And I guess we could side with what questions. That's kind of a question Mom will be calling out, where are you? What other places besides where are you would it be fine to say, here I am? Ask for you to do something, or even ask generically about somebody to do something, right? And certainly, I'm sure a lot of people already have in mind one of the instances of where these words come up, where that's exactly, at least one of the instances, actually multiple, where that's the reason for answering it, is because you're going to volunteer. I'm going to identify, here I am. You need something done. You want me to do something? Here I am to do it. Indicates a willingness in that kind of case that I'm going to do that from there. So there are different kinds of situations when we're going to respond that way. Like I said, it's not just where are you that we're trying to resolve. There are other things that come up, and we'll see that reflected in different ways in different people that we're going to look at. All right. We will look at the 17 men who gave that answer to either God or men. So if you wondered about it, I'm pretty sure you can't come up with 17. I don't want to challenge anybody. Rick's not looking that confident, so maybe, no, he looks fairly confident. I don't know. How many, out of 17, how many you think come up with, Rick? 3? No, I'm just kidding. So looking ahead, this is an introduction, and we'll probably end a little early today. I'm not going to apologize for that because I'll go over most of the time. Our tentative schedule is going to look like this. The first couple of weeks, starting next week, we're going to look at Abraham and Isaac. I think you can guess when that story comes up, right? That's the story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice Isaac. And both of them will give that. More than once will come up in that particular story. We'll hear those 3 words by both of those characters being uttered. All right? So we'll look at that. We'll then look at both Esau and Jacob, who both come up with those words along the way. May not be as familiar when that one comes up into play. You may want to look into that one on your own. We'll follow those 2 weeks up by Joseph and Jacob. So Joseph is going to come up in a situation in his travels, so to speak, and Jacob in the latter part of his life will use those words again. So he'll have been one person that will have speaking it twice. Not that he's the only person that spoke it twice, but at 2 very different times in his life that he spoke those words. We'll also see Moses. So again, some of the big characters of the Bible all had at some point say, "Here I am." We'll move on then to Caleb, one of the 2 faithful spies, one of the 2 men that were able to go into the promised land that were in the original group that came out of Egypt, and he will give those words from that. Samuel, that's a very famous story. I'm sure that some of you, when I mentioned those words, probably remembered that story of Samuel. Kind of how Samuel got his first inkling of what his future held for him and what role he would play with God. From that is when he got to say, "Here I am," which he didn't say very quickly, did he? As we'll look at. He was not quick to put those words out. We'll look at Eli. Eli, of course, was who Samuel was mentored by to some extent. We'll see him saying those words. We'll see somebody who we don't have a name for, but I think was a very strong person in saying those, meant those words, was dedicated to those words, put his life on the line with those words of saying, "Here I am." Jonathan's armor bearer, Jonathan, the son of Saul, friend of David. We'll wrap up with these 2 lessons. We'll look at Saul, and I say death messenger. It's a person, again, may have a name, I don't remember, but the person who comes and tells David about Saul's death, not totally factually, but does share about his death from that, and may regret the words, "Here I am." And then we'll talk about David and somebody called Shimei, both of whom uttered those words to kind of lump some people together. So you can see in just looking at those people, and the last one that we will look at is not on that list for some reason, I don't know, but I think it's Ananias in the New Testament. But anyway, you look at those people, those words were not spoken by all secondary characters. They're pretty much most of our prime characters from that. Like I say, we don't see Adam say it, we don't see Noah saying it, but we see most of the other key people uttering those words, which to me is another important thing to note at the high level. Those words are meaningful not just in what they said and when they were, but they're also meaningful because they come from people we think of as key characters, people we think of as being faithful characters in the Bible from that. And so I think we learn from that that's something to note, is it coming up from those people. Whoops, I did have another one. See, I didn't count my deals enough. See, I told you Ananias was the last one. I didn't lie. But before that, we'll look at both Isaiah and Jeremiah, a couple prophets that'll use those words as well. And then we'll wrap up with Ananias. See, that adds up better. That makes more sense. There's 12 now up there. Did you? Yeah, I can't count. Math. Got a master's in math. I still can't count. What's up? So that's what you can kind of expect that we'll cover over the next 12 weeks, hopefully. I say hopefully because we inevitably get interrupted by someone coming in to speak, and I never have that much idea when that will happen, but I suspect it will, at which point I probably may try to lump these together. I'm trying to do a quarter, not that we're going to do that all the time, but just so things move a little quicker onto something else as opposed to what we've done when we've done totally the textual ones. And I know you get tired of me faster, so that way I'll get out of your hair soon. I will miss one of those when I'm going to be gone at one point, but I'll get somebody to do that lesson. So for next week, it's Abraham and Isaac. Your scriptures, for those of you that want to study at home, since you don't have a book or something like that, if you want to jot down what you can study on your own in preparation to embarrass me with knowing more about it next week than I do. It starts, obviously, with the narrative as being shared about that whole incident with the offering of Isaac as a sacrifice in Genesis chapter 2, the first 18 verses of that. So that would be the primary textual area that we'll look at. Then it, of course, is in one of the examples of great faith, right? That is tremendous faith for what Abraham did in that case. And so, of course, he falls into the Hall of Fame, the chapter of Hall of Fame of Hebrews chapter 11. And so we'll also consider verses 17 through 19 as we look at that Here Am I. And it doesn't end there. James also looked back on that event. So James chapter 2, verses 21 through 24. So you've got 3 sets of scriptures that you can review this week in preparation for our first character studies of Here I Am. That one's probably more typical from that because it's kind of a normal question. We expect that to be the answer of Here I Am. But that's what we'll look at. Both Abraham and Isaac will say it. Questions about or comments about what we're going to do this quarter, or if you're going to just tell me it's a stupid idea, share that with me in the foyer. I will ignore you there, but I don't need raising up a mob with fire and stuff to threaten me or something. Pitchforks, whatever happens. All right. If nothing else, I'll let you have a few more minutes, and we will hit on Abraham and Isaac next week. Thank you for your attention.